Cornell University for having me here. It is a real pleasure. It's an honor to have the opportunity to explain the crisis that we're facing in Venezuela, probably the worst crisis that is right now, not only in Latin America, but in the Western Hemisphere. I will be more than welcome to listen to your questions, to talk about all the details that we're having in Venezuela, but also what can we do on the day after. I have to say, if my English is not very good looking, as a salsa singer used to say, sorry about that. But to begin my presentation, I would love to show you a video that was made by the BBC, the media of the UK, that I think in 3 minutes explain all the problems that we're having in Venezuela. ¿Cómo es que? Can you help me? How? Disculpa. Ay, ¿qué tiene aquí? Listo. Listo.
Caracas, capital of the country with the biggest oil reserves in the world. And yet, a city where people queue all day hoping for bread, nappies, or baby milk. We had to film these scenes undercover. Journalists aren't welcome as Venezuela sinks deeper into economic chaos. Filming inside supermarkets is a crime. Here's why. Many of them are empty. The government is drowning in debt. Imports have dried up. Inflation is over 1,000%. The people suffering the most are the poor in the city's sprawling slums.
I'm in one of the jeeps which specializes in transporting people up and down the mountain. And the principle here in the slum is pretty straightforward. The higher up the hill you live, well, the poorer you are.
This barrio used to be a stronghold of the late Hugo Chavez's socialist revolution. Not anymore. People here are desperate, struggling to find food and to stay safe. Caracas has become the world's most dangerous capital city. I met a heavily armed kidnap gang, nervous young men barely out of childhood. As Venezuela's crisis deepens, political tension rises. This a voter registration drive by the opposition Justice First party.
Why don't they let us have elections? They just put obstacles and more obstacles and more obstacles. That's why we have to do all this for. And many people that are here are tortured. And I was before, but now I'm divorced.
There have been weeks of clashes between protesters and police since the socialist government tried to abolish the powers of the opposition-controlled National Assembly. Opposition leaders called it a coup against democracy, and they want President Nicolas Maduro out. The last time the street violence was this bad was 3 years ago. The leader of the anti-Maduro protests back then was Leopoldo Lopez, who was imprisoned for 14 years. I met Lopez's mother, a tireless campaigner for his release and for political change.
Something's going to happen. And it's not going to be only for the Puerto Ricans, it's for Venezuelans.
She took me to the military prison where her son is held.
Oh,
She yelled to him, he yelled back.
look at that. Look at the guards.
Well, a chief has just come out of the prison.
See, maybe they'll take your camera.
As we filmed, guards emerged from the prison. We managed to conceal the camera in our car, but our cover was blown. The next day, we were deported. The Venezuelan government doesn't want the world to see the mess it's in. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, current.
So I always like to share with you that video because it is a video that is not done by us. It is a video that is done by a by the BBC, which is probably almost every country in the world, and in 3 minutes explain the crisis that we are facing in Venezuela. And here there are some statistics that are really complicated, that are frightening. 2 out of 3 Venezuelans do not eat 3 times a day. Almost 300,000 children suffer from malnutrition. Caracas, as you saw, has become the most violent capital in the world and the second most violent city in the world, not only because of homicides, because of kidnapping, because of robbery, because of bribery, etc. Apart from that, because of the situation, it is estimated that at least 2.5 million Venezuelans have fled the country. Right now, we're having a migration problem. Venezuelans are fleeing to Colombia, Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, and there is a huge Venezuelan community in Panama, the United States, and Spain. The inflation in 2018 for Venezuela is projected, listen to this, 18,000%. 18,000% is the inflation projected this year for Venezuela. The prices double almost every 3 weeks. And the poorer are getting poorer, and the regime is maintaining its power. Because a part of that social and economic problem, we have a political problem, that the main leaders of the opposition are in jail or are in exile. The political parties have been illegalized. There are more than 300 political prisoners, and there's no condition to go for an election. I've been in exile for 6 months, and I always say when I have the opportunity to do a conference like this, which I appreciate that you are here, that I shouldn't be here. I should be in my country. I should be working with my neighbors. I should be doing my job as a mayor. But 6 months ago, after 120 days of consecutive 120 consecutive days of protests that were non-violent, peacefully protests, the regime decided to remove me, to disqualify for any public administration role, and I have a warrant of arrest in Venezuela that forced me to go 35 days in clandestinity, that forced me to shave my beard for the first time in more than 10 years, use glasses, put a flat hat to escape the country that I was born, the country that I have grown up, and the country that I have not seen in the last 6 months, just because of political reason. So that's why I shouldn't be here. But you have 2 options as a political exile. Or you get depressed and probably you forget about your country, or you keep working harder than you did before to help to recover democracy and freedom. And that's what we're trying to do. In Venezuela right now, we're having an election that was called by the Electoral Council. We have tried everything to have free and fair elections in Venezuela. 120 days of protests. We tried 2 years ago a referendum, and more recently, there was a negotiation, a dialogue for 6 months between the opposition and the regime to try to get free and fair elections. A dialogue that took place in Dominican Republic, a dialogue that was witnessed by countries from the region, Chile, Mexico, Bolivia, and unfortunately, while the dialogue was going on, the regime decided to go further, jailing all the leaders, illegalizing other political parties, and calling to the elections. We have an election on May 20th, and there's no conditions at all to participate. I'm going to explain why, because many people have asked me, but aren't you giving the chance to Maduro to stay 6 years more in power? Isn't it a mistake to not participate in the elections. He's looking for legitimacy. He's looking for a recognition. And we cannot recognize an election that do not have these 5 conditions. First of all, the Electoral Council is not independent. The Electoral Council does what Maduro says to do. Second, the main leaders of the opposition that could be candidates for president that are leading the polls are in jail or in exile. Third, the main political parties cannot subscribe its name on the election because they have been illegalized. Fourth, more than 1 million of Venezuelans that could vote abroad are not allowed to vote, which is a totally discrimination. 1 million of Venezuelans, at least, that could vote in Miami, in Panama City, in Bogota, in Lima, in Santiago de Chile, in Buenos Aires, in Madrid, in New York, they are not allowed to vote. And fifth, the regime has not guaranteed an international delegation that could go to Venezuela to see the elections, to be witnessed of that process. So when we didn't get those conditions, the opposition decided that we cannot go to that elections. The good thing is that we are not alone. Countries like Colombia and Brazil, which are our neighbors, have said that they will not recognize that elections. Grupo de Lima, which is one of the main initiatives that has happened in the region in favor of democracy in Venezuela, that has 14 countries, they have said that there's no condition to go on election in Venezuela. The same happened in the OAS, where 19 countries said there were no guarantees to go to election in Venezuela, and also the United States, Canada, and the European Union have said that there's no conditions to go to election in Venezuela. So now we're planning what to do if we're not going to that election. And we're playing on different tables. The first of all, try to retake non-violent and peacefully protest, because that's what Maduro really is afraid of. When you have hundreds of thousands of people protesting, just asking for free and fair elections. We're not asking for a coup d'etat. We're not asking to kill anyone. We're just asking for free and fair elections, to have the chance to vote. That's something that he's afraid of. The second thing that we're working is on the international community. Which actions could the international community take to put more pressure on Maduro? So these initiatives, like I said before, Grupo de Lima, that didn't exist. Sanctions that has been applied, but for example, the European Union, that they didn't do that to Cuba, for example, or sanctions that have been applied from the United States and Canada, also put pressure on the high officials of the regime that have been involved in human rights violation, corruption, money laundering, drug trafficking. So with that, they are more limited to do things. And third, and probably the most important, how you persuade armed forces, especially middle and low range officials, to become institutional. I don't say coup d'etat because in Venezuela there is a coup d'etat every day. Every day, unfortunately, we have a regime and armed forces that are acting against the law, against the Constitution. But if we have armed forces that obey the Constitution and obey the law, probably the regime is done. But it's difficult. And you know why it's difficult? Because Venezuela has 2,000 generals. That's more than the whole NATO. Venezuela alone has more generals than the whole NATO. And those generals have been involved in drug trafficking, human rights violation, money laundering, and obviously the middle and low range soldiers are afraid sometimes to be outspoken. And the few that have been outspoken have been detained and have been really bad torture on the jails of Venezuela. We have an opportunity, I think, with this situation to organize all Venezuelans that are abroad, organizing the diaspora. This is something new for Venezuela. Probably Venezuela before Chavez was known to be a country of oil and country of women. And I always say that that's wrong. We didn't say the most important thing that Venezuela had, that we export democracy. Venezuela for more than 4 decades was the country with the most stable democracy in the region. When we had dictatorships in South America, such as Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, the armed conflict in Colombia, the wars in Central America, other dictatorships in the Caribbean, Venezuela had democracy. And not only we had democracy, we were a very open country that opened the doors to everyone that was suffering, not only in the region, but also people that left European countries. So now we are in a different situation. Not people that are coming to Venezuela. Venezuelans are leaving to other countries. And I think there is an opportunity to organize diaspora, to know where they are, to know what they are doing, to motivate them to keep connected to the country, and especially as young people, how we think on the day after to be ready to recover Venezuela. Venezuela will have so many challenges in health, in education, on security, on economy, and we will need so many people that have been abroad for 3, 5, 7 years to go back and recover democracy, recover freedom. You don't know what freedom is until you lose it. And I think that like medicine, education, technology innovate, dictatorship innovates too. In the past, probably it was classic for a dictator to get power through a coup d'etat. I'm not saying all the cases were like that, but many of the cases, especially in Latin America, were like that. You do the coup d'etat and you stay in power 10, 15, 20 years, and that's it. Now, how are the new dictatorships? They use democracy. They use the democratic institutions. They use the participation of the people to get to power. And from power, they destroy the institutions that allow them to get to power. And destroying the institutions, obviously, they destroy society. And that's one of the main things that we have to learn in Venezuela, that when we have democracy again, try to avoid that those things happen. I don't have any doubt that the crisis that we're having in Venezuela not only is affecting Venezuelans. The crisis that we're having in Venezuela, it is affecting and it is a threat to the region. The more Maduro stays in power, the worse for Latin American countries. The sooner Maduro leaves power, the better for the region. If we have democracy, I don't have any doubt that the region will be benefited. But if we keep having this regime, for the region will be a nightmare. Like it is, for example, for Colombia, that there have 600,000 Venezuelans legalized in its country. But when you probably add the ones that are not legalized, we're talking that they're having 800,000 people. Well, in 2010, there were no more than 40,000. So that's 20 times more in just 8 years. So that's why we're making this effort, the ones that have to be in exile, to describe the situation in our country, to discuss proposals that we can do for the day after, and especially organize the Venezuelans that are abroad, but also organize anyone from the region or from other parts of the world that are interested in Venezuela and that could share their experiences, their knowledge to recover a country that has the biggest oil reserve in the world, the 4th biggest gas reserve in the world, and that needs urgently to to diversify its economy in the future, because oil has been good, but also has been bad. I'm a part of a generation, and with this, I think I'm going to end to listen to your question. I'm a part of a generation that we have been born or we have been grown up in a country with no freedom. I don't know how to explain what is to live in a Venezuela with freedom. I don't know what is to live in a Venezuela with a rule of law. I don't know what is to live in a Venezuela with no crime. I don't know what's to live in a Venezuela with not saying goodbye to a relative in the airport because she or he has taken a decision to leave the country to get opportunities abroad. I don't know what is to live in a country where technology innovates, where the free market works. We don't know that. I started in office with 28 years old, and I started that because we decided as a generation, because there are other people that are in the parliament, there are congressmen, or mayors too, or councils that we needed to be involved in politics and public administration to try to recover freedom and democracy. And I don't want to give up. My grandparents left the Soviet Union in 1927 because of communism. They were not able to go back. They took the right. They took a wrong. They made a bad decision probably. They went to Cuba, and in 1970, with my father, they left Cuba. And in 2017, I left Venezuela. 3 generations that have fled the country in 90 years. I'll leave Cornell this afternoon, so you won't have any problem with communism tomorrow. But saying that, my grandparents were not able to go back to Ukraine, where they were born, and my father, which is alive, has not been able to go back to Cuba. I want to go back to Venezuela, and I wouldn't only go back to Venezuela. I want to enjoy my country. I want to give my children a country that I have not been able to enjoy. What is going on in Venezuela is above any ideology. As a Democrat, as someone who believes in democracy, you could be liberal, you could be social democrat, you could be anything. But what was going on in Venezuela, that video that I show you, is above any ideology. You have people every day dying because they cannot eat. You have people dying every day because they don't have medicine. You have people fleeing the country every day because they don't have opportunity. You have people every day dying because of crime, because the regime is not investing in security. And you have people every day that is being repressed because they think different. Journalists that have been censored because they not allow independent media. That's above any ideology. So we can think different, but there are basic things like human rights, like the alternation in power, like independent of public powers, that you must agree. So with this, I'll finish. I'll show you another video that explains technically what we lived last year on the 120 days of protest, and then I will be more than welcome to hear your question. Thank you again for being here. Thank you again for listening to me. And sorry about my English. Thank you so much.
One of Venezuela's political opposition was taken down by a blind hand. It happened during the wave of anti-government demonstrations in April and May of 2017. And these are militarized police vehicles designed to break up protests. They're part of a so-called anti-riot system built by a Chinese company that's willing to do business with rogue regimes. Attendees got an up-close look at this military-grade equipment in November at Milipol Paris, the world's largest internal security expo. The new system is marketed as state-of-the-art policing technology, but experts say it takes crowd control to a dangerous new level. First, we'll look at how it works. Then we'll explain what makes it so effective and potentially deadly. Trucks and armored vehicles block off a street during a protest. A rear command and control truck instructs other vehicles to fire water cannons from behind the barrier. These cannons can also spray CS, or liquid tear gas, and other chemicals. Tear gas grenades, a disorienting laser, and a high-frequency sound wave can also be used as weapons to disperse people. Why is the system dangerous? Arms researchers we spoke to explained. First, the barrier. It obscures the sightline of police officers firing water cannons and can potentially block escape routes. This increases the risk of injury.
Firing from behind a barrier or wall can really lead to disproportionate and indiscriminate weapons use.
Next, the liquid tear gas, which can be added to the water. A lever inside the vehicle allows individual police officers to decide how much is sprayed. These liquid chemicals are largely unregulated, and manufacturers can sell a range of potencies. Some of the anti-riot vehicles are also equipped with tear gas grenade launchers. Firing tear gas canisters directly into crowds essentially turns them into missiles. Tear gas is intended to be lobbed, not fired, into open space to disperse crowds. Then there are audio and visual weapons. The combined effect is a potential assault on the eyes, ears, and breathing, something that experts say could create stampedes and lead to more injuries and deaths.
Using all these weapons at the same time doesn't necessarily make them more effective. It can make them more dangerous.
So who makes this system? It's a Beijing-based state-owned company called Norinco, and is one of China's largest producers of military equipment. It adapts military products for use by civilian police forces and sells them internationally, sometimes in arms for minerals deals with countries like Zimbabwe and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and often to repressive regimes embargoed by Western countries, like Venezuela. Norinco did not comment on our findings, but this design is reflective of the hardball tactics that China takes against dissent. There appears to be growing interest in integrated systems like this among police forces looking to clamp down on protests. And without any effective regulation on riot control, it's the best system money can buy.
So, before I ask the question, to be honest, I don't know much about Venezuela or the region in general, Latin America. Other than the fact that some of the best people I know come from there.
Where are you from, sorry?
Some of the best people I know, nicest people I've known, like they're from there.
Thank you.
So,
Where are you from, sorry?
I'm from Pakistan.
Pakistan.
Yeah. So, I know you mentioned that how it's not an ideological issue, principally when people don't have food to eat or medicine to cure themselves. But whenever an ideological conflict happens, there are two sides of the story. Without taking any normative stand on what I have my personal opinions, I just wanted to ask what is the kind of rhetoric the regime uses to kind of frame the protesters, and what is the rhetoric that they are using to justify their position. So I just want to know.
Can you ask again? Sorry, didn't understand. Can you ask again?
So let me rephrase. What is the kind of rhetoric that, and maybe somebody here who knows Spanish can translate, rhetoric that the regime is using to frame the protesters and vilify them in popular media, and what is their stance and what is their opinion? And
yeah, well, last year, as I said, we protest for 120 consecutive days, and when we were repressed, they just justified that, saying that we were terrorists, and that we were planning to make a coup d'état, and we were people that do not represent Venezuelan values, that we were supported by anyone that Maduro could imagine, from Álvaro Uribe in Colombia, through Donald Trump in the United States, through Israel. And what I think the biggest mistake that Maduro did is that he didn't realize that we were united as a country. In those protests, you saw a very old people that for me was really moving, see a 70 years old grandmother protesting, or you saw an 18 years old student. He was so strong, the protest. We put a lot of pressure on him. and he decided to kill us. That was a decision. And 130 Venezuelans were killed on those protests. More than 4,000 were illegally detained, and more than 12,000 were wounded. So, in my opinion, that episode last year changed the game completely in Venezuela, because Maduro went from being an authoritarian to a totalitarianism regime. And just we went to the streets because of the hyperinflation, crime, shortages of food, shortages of medicine. I mean, we felt that we need to do something, and he decided to repress. So that was his justification. I don't know if I answer your question. Thank you.
What has happened today in Venezuela is a culmination of decades of a communist regime. And the support for such a regime has also come from the people themselves. Now, I wish to know how much of that was really popular support. Was it really a minority which dictated and influenced everything? Because private capital and private institutions were taken out systematically.
Yeah.
And eventually that leads to destruction. That's what happened in Russia. That's what happens in Cuba. That's happening in North Korea.
That's right.
So it's in Venezuela, the people who are suffering today, the same people who supported a similar regime.
That's a very good question. As I was saying in my presentation, one of the things that we need to learn on the Venezuelan case, and there are other countries in the world also, that these dictators use democratic institutions, use the participation of the people to get power, and from power destroy institutions, and after that destroy society. What is really interesting is that many of the people that today are starving in Venezuela, many of the people are dying because of lack of medicines, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, voted for Chavez, supported the regime. Well, they thought that it could be a change. They were manipulated. And now they are poorer, they are suffering, they are dying, or the ones that could leave the country. What is really interesting is that this socialist regime has had the billions that no other president in Venezuela has ever had. We're talking on a country that in 19 years had an income just because of oil of more than $1 trillion. $1 trillion has had Chavez and Maduro in 2 decades. So it is estimated. I'm having a conference tomorrow at Harvard University where there's a Venezuelan group working on an economic plan, and they have calculated how much of that money has been lost. And it is estimated that at least 350 billion out of that trillion, it is lost. So, do you imagine what would we be able to do with that money? On schools, on universities, on infrastructure, on healthcare. So, yeah, they voted for Chavez. Now they are really, they regret to do that. And according to the last poll surveys, at least 75% of Venezuelans disapprove Maduro's regime. So that's why he's using the armed forces to maintain power.
Was it prepared for this to happen now and not before? Because, I mean, definitely the prices of oil is one thing, but there should be something else besides that. So what do you think it didn't happen during Chavez time?
You mean the protest? Or what happened? What?
And the trigger of this high inflation, insecurity, all of this stuff, because the crisis is really now, it wasn't before. I have another question. Why do you think that even though like those people that are suffering and starving are still voting for the regime they're still using democratic ways? Right?
Yeah. No. Well, I'm gonna answer first the second question. No, I mean many of the people that supported Chavez 10 or 15 years ago regret doing that, and now they are against the regime. So we're talking that approximately 75% of Venezuelans disapprove Maduro regime, and they are affected because of crime, because of lack of food, because of shortages of medicine, hyperinflation. As I said, it is estimated 18,000% this year, so just people cannot live. I mean, the minimum wage in Venezuela, minimum salary, is $2 a month. You cannot do anything with that. So you have like a whole black market every day, or you have people that they are not working because going to work is more expensive than your salary, literally like that. So it's better to stay at home. So that's why. That's answering your second question. I mean, people are not supporting the regime that they used to, and that's getting bigger and bigger every day. But I have to say that we are having a social control right now. So this look here, listen to this, which is perverse. We don't have food, so Maduro's regime decided to give to the people a box of food, what they call clap. That is given once a month, average. That box of food is not even produced by Venezuela. It is imported in Mexico. That has also created a network of corruption. And that box of food is given to you if you are loyal to the regime. And there are many proofs of that. If you participated in those protests, if you went to vote on an election of the opposition, I have a case. If someone on Twitter or Instagram is following an opposition leader, you are not able to have a box of food. So that's social control. That's why we're going from an authoritarian regime to a totalitarianism regime. And from the first question, I think this problem was probably. I mean, it's been accumulating for years. I mean, you talk about insecurity in Venezuela because of crime. 310,000 Venezuelans have been killed just because of crime since 1999. I'm doing a visiting scholar at Georgetown University. My research is about citizen security, and I've been doing that. 310,000 Venezuelans has been killed because of crime. Just in the last 5 years, 100,000. Chavez had $100 oil barrel. So he thought by that moment that he could do every social program to maintain the people, And that was not able, that was not possible. And now we have debt to China, now we have debt to Russia. Now our oil fields were given to Russia, were given to China. Our gas fields also were given to Russia with no approval of the National Assembly. So it is incredible that you're having a country which has a huge debt, hyperinflation, and the 97% of our exports is oil, and more than 80% of our food, when we have it, it is produced other part. So it was a problem that was built through the years.
So the challenge right now is to change the president.
Yeah.
In your opinion, I'm pretty sure there's a big list to guarantee elections. The challenge is to get people to go and vote. Most people don't want to vote because they don't believe in the system. In your opinion, I know the list must be large, what will be the 3 major changes that we could say, okay, we could do this, let's go vote?
Well,
everybody, just to recap here, most people are not going to vote because they don't believe in the system. So I think you all are fighting for that. Thank you, by the way.
Yeah.
What would be if you have to resume it to 3 years?
Yeah, well, as I said, there are 5 reasons that we consider that explain why there are no conditions to not go to an election in Venezuela, presidential election. Political candidates from the opposition that are leading the polls are in exile or in jail. Political parties are illegalized. At least 1 million of Venezuelans cannot vote abroad. There is no guarantee that an international delegation could go to Venezuela to see free and fair elections, and there is no independent electoral council. If you ask me, out of those 5, if we have an independent electoral council, if we have the candidates that could run, and if we have the Venezuelans that could vote abroad, that will be enough to beat Maduro on an election. But we don't have anything of that.
we are what, 2 months from probably election day. Do you think that could happen in 2 months?
I don't think it will happen. I don't think they will. I don't think they will have that election on May 20th. That's.
Sorry, so I got a second question. So, okay, election comes, people that want to change does not vote because they don't believe in elections and the system. What's next?
Okay, what's next? First of all, we need to keep the pressure, or I have to say increase the pressure from the international community. International community, I think the key that has been different from Cuba, for example, is that the pressure has not only from the United States or from Canada. So the strategy that we have implemented is that the pressure has to become from different regions. First of all, Latin America, the European Union, and North America. So more sanctions from those countries, restriction for the high officials to travel on those countries, to freeze its, I don't know if I'm saying the right word, to freeze its properties and bank accounts, assets. That's very, very important. And probably close some embassies in Caracas. That's my opinion, no? To increase the pressure. Second, we need to retake protest, non-violent protest. That's what Maduro really fears. But I understand that people today is afraid. Why people are afraid in Venezuela to protest again? Because they could be killed. It was not just a repression of tear gas and that's it. I mean, 130 Venezuelans were killed. When there was an average of one Venezuelan of each day of protest. So that's what we need to do. And I have this is David Smolansky proposal. I'm going to say it here. It's not an opposition proposal. I think we need to do our own election. That's what I'm proposing to the opposition from Excel. We need to do our own election, that we can elect the candidates and the ministers that the people want and not what the regime wants. And and I think that if we do that, you can have 4, 5, or 6 million Venezuelans in our country and abroad voting for that, and Maduro will have real problem. And least, but not less, you need to persuade soldiers, middle and low range. As I said, not to do a coup d'etat. If you become institutional, you are helping Venezuela to have democracy. Thank you.
So, as a follow-up and a little bit on those questions, and what you were saying about changing and increasing pressure, and even doing an internal election, which it was kind of done with the consultation, if you want to.
July 16th.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me that the opposition has been very heterogeneous. There is a number of people in exile, but even in exile, you guys don't seem to be working together very much. So what about that? What about the opposition having like a common plan? You know?
No, we are in the exile. We are united. I mean, yesterday I was with Julio Borges in Washington D.C., and 2 weeks ago I was with Antonio Ledesma. I mean, we are working on a platform internationally that we can organize diaspora, that we can do some activism on the diaspora, and that we can do diplomatic efforts to increase that international community pressure that I was saying before. I think it's good at the same time that you have different type of thinking in the opposition, because we are democratic.
Fantastic. I mean, we agree on that. But you know, this is not a new question.
No, it's not. But at the same time, and I don't have any problem to say it, if there are opposition parties in Venezuela, or if there are opposition leaders in Venezuela, that their priority is not to take out the dictatorship, they have to stay aside. That's my opinion as a new generation in politics. That's a very personal. Probably it's not. No, maybe it's not the political correctness to say this. But if there are leaders in the opposition, or if there are political parties in the opposition, that they think that they could live with this regime, that they could see, they see that they could save some spaces, like, oh, I'm going to have some mayors, I'm going to have some governors, I'm going to have some congressmen. Goodbye, man. We don't need you. Because everyone in Venezuela has a number. Everyone who thinks different has a number. So that's my opinion. Another thing I have to say, the media and many people are so focused, and I respect that, on the divisions, on the different ways of thinking on the opposition. But what about the regime? What about the ex-president of Petróleos de Venezuela, Rafael Ramírez, who is now one of the main critics of Maduro? Miguel Rodríguez Torres, who was the chief of intelligence of Hugo Chavez and the guy that he created the tortures in the jails. Now he's in jail by Maduro. Or what about the general attorney who is in exile in Colombia? So they are fragmented too. They are broken too.
I think I asked those questions here to you about the opposition because
Yeah.
you are the opposition, not a Chavista or no part of the government. I think even though there is some mediatization on it and publicity about it, I'm not focusing on that. But it's true that in the Venezuela agenda of action, there is a lack, at least, of communication, if it's not unity.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if it's something being done to address that gap. Because even if we want to retake protests and ask people to put their life at risk, there should be at least some trust.
Right.
Not only in the fact that you may survive, but also in the people that is supposed to be represented.
Right.
So the question would be, is there something happening from the opposition side, from the opposition leaders, to give back that trust, or to at least try to give back that?
Well, a new platform has been created, Frente Amplio Venezuela Libre, which is more than political parties. There is a student movement, churches, private sector, workers. I think that's a very interesting platform. Also, we are working united on the international platform, and I think what we need to do now is a better call to action. To be honest with you, and I don't have any problem to say that there are some opposition leaders that are much older than us, that they don't see this as a dictatorship. They see this as a bad government. And I respect that, but that's not enough. That's not enough to get rid of this. If you saw the protests last year, who were the ones who were in the front line? The young people. So that's why, at least, what I'm trying to do. Try to gather especially the new generations, the ones that were in the student movement, the ones that, as I said, were born or have grown up in this dictatorship, that could build that trust, that could refresh the politics in Venezuela, to have a better plan to get rid of this. But we have to say that this is, Venezuela has a very complicated crisis. Sometimes many people compare the crisis in Venezuela to other dictatorships in Latin America. In my opinion, Venezuela is a unique case. Why is a unique case? Because we're talking about a narco-petro state run by soldiers. You're having a regime that runs the biggest licit business in the world, that is the oil company. And at the same time, you're having a regime that is running the biggest illicit business in the world, that is drug trafficking, starting from the vice president, who is sanctioned because of drug trafficking. So that's the challenge that we're facing. Colombia had that for many years, and the cartels never went to power. Now cartels are in power in Venezuela. Thank you.
Going back to the political pressure from the outside, you were talking about Central America or Latin America, the U.S. and the EU, but you also mentioned that Russia and China are heavily invested in the energy that is coming out of Venezuela, the oil reserves, gas reserves. So as we've seen in other places like Cuba and North Korea, if you have one of those countries that have such sway in the UN, on the Security Council and everything, and they're protecting their interests in a place like this, how does that play into whether you can effectively put political pressure?
Well, in the case of China, the main problem that they have is that there's a huge debt to them, and there's no guarantee that the regime will be able to pay that. So what they just want is their debt being paid. We're talking about billions of dollars, no? So that's the main. The Chinese interest is entirely economic, even though they have done some business related to politics, like the video that I showed you, that those tanks and weapons were sold by a Chinese company. From the Russians' perspective, that's different. I think there is a geopolitical interest there. You have a country that is less than 3 hours in plane to the United States. We know that Putin's influence it's beyond Russia. We've seen that in Ukraine, we've seen that in Crimea, in Georgia, even here in the United States, all the debate that is having because of the elections. And the problem that we're having right now is that many of our oil fields, and one of the things that not much people know, our gas fields in the east of Venezuela were given to the Russians with no authorization from the parliament. Why happened that? Because the parliament was run by the opposition when it was won in 2015. So definitely, in my opinion, Russians are playing to keep Maduro in power. Maduro just announced a crypto coin that will be the new Bolivar. Well, and Time magazine has just released a study that the Russians were the ones who advised Maduro to create that to see if he could get stability in the economy. He would not get it. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that they are playing a role to keep Maduro in power. So the main business that they have with Venezuela is not only gas and oil, but also arms. I mean, the majority of the arms that the armed forces have today in Venezuela were sold by the Russians.
There is no more questions. I have one final question. It's how do you visualize the reconstruction of Venezuela, like the day after?
Well, first of all, I think we will need to have an economic plan, and we'll need help from multilaterals. What we have discussed is that at least Venezuela will need a Marshall Plan. We'll need probably $80 billion to try to recover the economy and to build trust, not only in the private sector in Venezuela, but in the private sector abroad to invest in Venezuela. Second, and that's the topic that I've been studying. I have worked as a mayor, and it's my passion. We need to decrease as quickly as possible crime rate, especially for Venezuelans that have fled the country. In the last 2 or 3 years, Venezuelans have fled because of hyperinflation, shortages of food, or shortages of medicine. But I saw a study once that 7 out of 10 Venezuelans have left the country because of crime. So we need to change the justice system. We need to restructure all the police system. We'll need to invest in technology. We'll need to work really hard to decrease all the corruption numbers that are having, and also reinvent our jail system. So those are, in my opinion, the most important things in Venezuela: the economy and security. And also you will need to do a work on education to value democracy, to value freedom, and to recover institutions. While I was mayor, there was a huge challenge. Caracas, as you saw, was the most violent capital in the world. When I started in El Hatillo is one of the 5 municipalities in Caracas, had the highest kidnapping rate in Venezuela, one of the highest in Latin America. When I started in office, El Hatillo had the year before 94 kidnappings. We were able to decrease that to 20. And we did it because we had to get rid of almost 35% of our officers that were involved in kidnapping, that were involved in crime, that were involved in bribery. And the other thing that we did is that we work on transparency. And El Hatillo was the municipality that decreased most corruption according to International Transparency that published that study 2 months ago. And I felt proud, not because of that, because obviously there are many things that you could do better. I felt proud because of my team. I felt proud because we did that in this crisis. And I felt proud because it was a new generation working on public administration. So that's a local experience I would love to share in the future nationally. And obviously, we will need many Venezuelans to go back and share all those knowledge and experiences that have had in other countries. So thank you so much.
We're running out of time.